Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Good morning to you, or good afternoon, as the case may be, whatever, good day. And I guess I'll give the date for lack of anything else. It's the 16th of July. Let's start because the present is fraught. And the future unknown. So let's drop back into some history. I happened to read today, and perhaps you did as well, a piece in the arts section of the New York Times, but it was about a place very near here that many of us certainly have been to. And so anytime you see something written about a place you know, it's hard to resist seeing what it's about, especially in the arts section. And it was about George Washington. And I must say that one of the things that surprised me when I came to live here in Western Pennsylvania was the fact that George Washington had been here a number of times as a young man. And my sense of George Washington, of course, was the general and the president, but that he was here as a young man, far to the west of his Virginia home. And then the more I found out, the more interesting it was to me. He had a lot of adventures here that nearly cost him his life, and that, in fact, if any of those incidents had ended differently and in not a good way for the young man from Virginia, the United States of America may, in fact, not exist. And it certainly wouldn't have the history it has now because of what an astonishing first president of this new upstart nation he was. So the piece is about something that happened to him, which weighed on him as he grew older. An incident from his youth, and understandably weighed on him. And it's the incident that happened near Fort Ligonier. He was about, well, I guess he was 26 years old. And again, George Washington fought for the British? Yeah. I mean, it's history that I think Western Pennsylvanians learn, but I don't know that I knew that. I must have known it at some point, but most Americans, I would argue, if you were to say, do you know George Washington fought for the king? They'd say, are you nuts? He fought against them. Well, first, he fought with them and for them. And that was during what we call the French and Indian War, but what Winston Churchill called the First World War. Now, the French and Indian War gets very short shrift when one is in school. It pales beside the Revolutionary War. It pales to the Civil War and the wars we were told were world wars. It sort of ranks there with like the War of 1812, right? And the French and Indian. But the reason Churchill called it the French and Indian War, I mean, the First World War, is because it was a global struggle. We think of it as this war that played out in part around here, but it was playing out as far away as European territories like India. And the impact of it, what was being fought over, was colonial plunder by these European nations. They were fighting for their holdings or their intended holdings in the New World and in Africa and in Asia and in North America. And in North America, obviously, the French and the British had been trying to carve out various areas at the time of this event when a young George Washington, fighting for the king, almost lost his life. There was a huge French fort, rather close, that the British wanted desperately to take. And that was, of course, Fort Duquesne, where the Point is, where Pittsburgh sits. And so I guess, according to this article, what happened is around 1787, George Washington is about to, I guess, ascend to the presidency, to be the first president of this country. But for some reason, well, understandably, it put him in a somewhat contemplative mood, and he was not known as a necessarily contemplative man. But he did sit down and write a few notes, very few, about something that was bugging him. And what was bugging him was November 12th, 1758. He was at Fort Ligonier. He was 26 years old. He was leading a group of volunteers from Virginia, and they had been sent out to help another group of Virginians who were trying to push back the French. And so Washington sets out with his group of men to help the other Virginians. And somebody opened fire. And when it was all over, several dozen people were injured, 14 were killed, and the people doing the shooting were Washington's Virginians shooting the Virginians they had come to help. It was a horrible friendly fire incident. And George Washington was to blame, or because he was the leader, was to blame. I'm not sure if they knew whoever fired the first shot. But Washington, realizing what was happening, rode in between the two groups of Virginians, obviously risking his life. And he recalled in these notes that never in his life had he been in more imminent danger. He assumed he was about to die. But he stopped the firing. This all comes up because I guess archaeologists, actually what are called battlefield archaeologists, have finally, they say, absolute proof of exactly where this happened. And they intend, eventually they will tell us it's on private property. It was a local teenager, unnamed in this article, about a decade ago, who, with a metal detector, was looking to see if he could find any evidence in the area where the old Forbes Road was. The Forbes Road, which I believe is right outside, pretty much a few blocks from where I'm sitting right now. Isn't the Forbes Road now Penn Avenue in Pittsburgh? I mean, it was part of the road that General Forbes at the time was hacking out of the wilderness so he could get to Fort Duquesne. So it was generally believed that this horrific friendly fire event that Washington couldn't forget happened on the Forbes Road or in that vicinity. Anyway, this kid a decade ago did find a whole bunch of stuff, 124 different artifacts, all in one spot. And so the professionals, not long after, came in. And they've been digging there for some time, and they have, without a doubt, found the exact place where George Washington suffered this terrible incident and almost lost his life. So they've found French watch keys. They found 17th century Swedish coins, cannonballs, musket balls, all kinds of ammunition and pieces from clothing. And they've been able, using isotope analysis, to trace the lead in the musket balls. This is so mind-blowing. To mines in Europe, in Quebec, and in Missouri, which are all known sources for the French and British forces. So they feel they have incontrovertible proof. And eventually they're going to tell us where this is. They're going to obviously display some of this stuff they found. And American history goes on from there. Obviously, at some point, Fort Duquesne did fall. It was renamed Fort Pitt. And I do think, because it was surprising to me to understand, to learn when I came here, that George Washington was here. I think the same kind of disbelief greets people who might come to my hometown, much further west than Pittsburgh, that also figured in the French and Indian War before this country was founded. Because Green Bay was held by the French as well. They're the ones who first settled it. The place names up there are French. The college I often talk about there that my father had a peace and justice center at is in De Pere, the father. I lived in a part of the town named Alloway, EZ at the end, and that is after Father Claude Alloway, again, a French priest. Green Bay was named by the French, but it was La Baie Verte. And it wasn't until this war that the French lost. And in losing this war, they lost more than Green Bay, which they lost more than Pittsburgh. They lost huge holdings all over the world. So that war, which played out in such a huge swath of 3 continents, understandably, Churchill said was the First World War. And the British clearly prevailed. And the French lost all of the land they held east of the Mississippi. So American history is, well, world history is fascinating. By the way, in Europe, that war is not called the French and Indian War. That's our perspective. It's called the 7 Years' War. So as wars go, that was a quickie, the 7 Years' War. And French and Indian, the fact is that the Native Americans, the tribes, were fighting on both sides. And it didn't end well for them either. But so anyway, there's this big article in the art section because of them finally finding, it says, a once lost battlefield is excavated. And where Washington faced great danger. Ligonier, PA. And who knew? And it also, the article ends with the unhappy reality that, so our most famous general and our first president and our, many would say, greatest president and our founding father, this guy that we revere and attribute so much to, was responsible for a friendly fire incident that killed a lot of his own men. And a lot of veterans did work on this archaeological dig, and one of the veterans was saying, wow, I mean, it just shows how, and people don't understand how in battle these things can happen, and how those things do haunt, obviously, haunt the people that were in them. They're still looking for what they assume are the mass graves from the incident, and they say when they find them, you know, they aren't going to dig. They're going to, you know, respect that, but they'd like to put a monument up. So anyway, there's that in some military history for you. Better than talking about current affairs, if you ask me, but whatever. And just staying with the military history in these parts just for a second, if you'll indulge me. I do have, oh, Gigi, hang on. I'm sorry. I do have something else, and it's the obituary of, I haven't had an obituary in a long time. But Gigi writes, I'm so glad you're talking local history. I recently visited Jumonville Glen, where the first battle of the French Indian War was fought. This is where the French commander, Joseph Coulon de Jumonville, was killed. The area, a glen, henceforth came to be known as Jumonville Glen. It's an interesting area to visit, right outside Uniontown, near the historic Summit Inn. There are a few historical markers, a short paved path to the site of the first shot, and then hiking trails. Well, yeah, it is. I mean, you know, this area is obviously rich in history, but it is hard to be anywhere that is not rich in history. It's just that we don't know. We don't appreciate the fact that we could all be easily speaking French, but for this or that event going a different way. A mistake made by this man or this, who knows? But the reality is much of what we consider the United States, and we're invariably thinking of it as British, was French. They were here first. They're the first who started, cutting down our beautiful forest and going after all our astonishing animal life. Um, yeah, and they did it through. They were on the rivers, so that the French could easily, using the waterways, the Great Lakes, end up, yeah, in Green Bay in a period of time, in the 1600s, where you don't think, what? What? 100 years before even we declared independence? Yeah, there were folks living where I grew up. American history, fascinating. So here's a little also close to home and also with a military tinge, to say the least, but closer to our present time. And this information comes from an obituary for a man named Paul Bugus, uh, who had a long life but is now gone, died at the age of 96, spent most of his life in West Virginia. So Paul Bugus was a guy who had been in the military and who had worked in intelligence fields, and he was charged in the early 50s with building something in a hillside and under it, at the behest of the Pentagon, and to keep it a secret. And so for more than 20 years, Paul Bugis showed up for work dressed as a general worker at a resort called the Greenbrier. Now, some of you are onto it. Yeah. Most people at the Greenbrier thought of him as a kind of a fix-it guy. And he and about 12 other Pentagon employees blended in with the other resort employees as they built this huge doomsday bunker that was intended to secure the Congress of the United States in the event of a nuclear war. And what's so bizarre is they were building this thing and they masqueraded, I guess, it by having part of it, out in the open and be used as a sort of a convention area. So, in other words, it was used, but they were nefariously, and I can't quite figure out how, because when you read about how extensive this thing was, I mean, they tunneled deep into, they had blast doors on it that weighed 28 tons. Concrete walls that were 2 to 3 feet thick. And he was the superintendent of this thing that was at the time called Project Greek Island. But its intent was to keep members of Congress alive and able to function while the rest of us died, I guess. It contained over 1,000 beds. It had meeting halls for all, big enough for 435 members of the House at the time and 100 senators. It had a room that could serve as a joint chamber to hold them all. It had a cafeteria that could feed 400 people. And over the course of its existence, that cafeteria had to be kept stocked. There was a radio center, a communication center, a medical center, a dental office, an operating room, a storage room that held riot control weapons. And I guess that in case, the locals tried to get in. And it was designed to function for up to 45 days. I guess the thinking after 45 days, out you go, and you're on your own at that point. So the rest of us, at the time I was being taught in school, duck and cover. We were, when the Russians dropped the bomb on us, we were just supposed to get under our desks and put our hands over our head and cover up. But members of Congress, I guess, were supposed to get in their cars and drive to West Virginia. Who's thinking of this? If you start What? How would they have time? I mean, none of it makes any sense to me. What were they thinking? But astonishingly, for 30 years, the existence of this doomsday bunker underneath the Greenbrier was a secret. Now, some locals had rumors about it. I mean, they saw all this weird stuff. There were whispers that there was something under there, maybe to shelter the president. But no one could quite figure out why a city with fewer than 3,000 people in it needed a 7,000-foot runway, which they also had built. The guy who actually ran the Greenbrier, he himself knew something was up, but he did not know, and he knew enough not to ask. His name, this incurious guy, was named, where did I see his name? Truman Wright. He ran the Greenbrier from 1951 to 1974, and he said he purposely didn't ask about the construction that was going on, and that he once spoke with a contractor who was really curious about what that one really big room is and why we would need it. And the contractor said to the incurious Truman Wright, "You mean you're kidding? This is supposed to be an exhibition hall? But we just installed 110 urinals. What in the hell are you tending to exhibit?" So, anyway, uh, so the thing got blown. The reason you and I have heard of this is a Washington Post reporter, a guy named Ted Gupp. And the article he wrote did not appear until 1992. I mean, I always had the sense that I knew about this before then, but no, we didn't. 1992, he was the first to reveal the shelter's existence. And after the Washington Post blew it, the whole thing was declassified. In 95, it was converted into a Cold War museum. But I, I mean, I don't know. 5 months before the article was published, the Soviet Union had ceased to exist. The Cold War was over. The Washington Post had held the article, concerned that it might, be a national security risk. And it wasn't until they were assured by the Pentagon that they could, in fact, out the whole thing now, that they did publish. But for poor Paul Bugus, there went his job, his whole life's work. He was not thrilled, but he went on to sort of look over the turning of his baby into a public space. I don't know. Any of you ever been there? So obviously you could get into that one part that was called an exhibition hall, and every once in a while was used as such, but I guess it did have 110 urinals. And Paul Buyas, Bugas, sorry, they tell you how to pronounce it here in the obit, Bugas, um, ended up giving guided tours, which for him was a sort of depressing come down from what he had thought was this thing he had built that was going to literally save the government of the United States. Even his kids didn't know what the hell he did. One of his sons says, "We thought he was a TV repair guy." So there you have it, Paul Bugas, the director of the Doomsday Bunker under the Greenbrier in West Virginia. And that's the end of the history, I'm afraid. I've blown it. That's it. Which brings us, of course, to God help us, the present. There is something that I had wanted to share with you that somehow, as happens, other subjects come up and I keep talking about something else and I never get to it. But I'm getting to it right now because something else I saw today dovetails with it. And so we can talk about it. It is I think, disconcerting to say the least, bit of information of some chicanery going on right now. The initial article I had seen was that Homeland Security, God help us, under the puppy shooter, Kristi Noem, working along with Elon Musk's Doge, is intending to put together, using all those federal databases that Elon's tech babies went in and got in the very first days of this administration. Remember how they went right for the computers and there were these standoffs with employees saying, no, you do not have clearance, you cannot, and they were all brushed aside, and Elon and the boys got hold of all the information that the government holds on us. Well, it turns out that Homeland Security, using some of that data, especially that gotten from Social Security, as well as databases involving immigration, and the word is integrating it all to create essentially a list of everybody that they say is a citizen of the United States. By the way, I mentioned yesterday that when I was a kid and I'd hear in the movies, show me your papers, I'd think, oh, it was how chilling that to live in a place where you had to prove you could be there, that there were armed men or, frightening looking men who were able to inquire. And if you didn't have your papers, God help you. Well, we're living in that country now. The United States has never had such a list, ever. it runs against what used to be our sense of what America was. In fact, it's been considered kind of like Social Security was, a third rail. You just don't go there because Americans value their privacy. And such a list suggests that that is no longer true. So the initial article I read said that when federal agencies collect or use our personal information in new ways that have not happened before, there are procedures that are required to follow, including giving public notice. Did you get any notice about this? No, me either. Do we have any? Are we credulous enough to think that the Trump administration would bother following procedures that are required? A privacy expert at the University of Virginia Law School, when asked about this, what's called data aggregation or data integration, said, this is a hair on fire development. It sets off so many questions. How is this list going to be used? Will states have it? What sort of security measures are in place? How trustworthy is the data on it? And DHS says this is to provide a voter registration list, a federal voter registration list. And as I said, the privacy expert says, hair on fire. That brings us to the piece I saw today. Something that's happening in Colorado, although going to be happening in a state near and dear to you, perhaps. In Colorado, county election officials are being approached by some people who say they're working for the White House and that they want to have copies of their voter rolls. Again, hair on fire. Some of these counties in Colorado have dutifully handed over the voter rolls to these people who say they're from the White House. Others have said, no, that's not information that we give you. And what's fascinating about the piece I read about this is that a lot of the people that are saying no are Republicans. Because they understand what their job is, and their job is to protect their voter lists. These people are also asking to physically inspect their voting machinery. Now, I don't know about you, but gets me thinking that that election that so many folks are eagerly anticipating, those midterms, which are a year and a half away, might not be elections like we have known in the past. If the federal government, Trump's government, is at this point gaining access to the machines that we vote on, getting the voting rolls. They are right now, I mean, they play the long game, right? They are right now, my guess is, working to subvert that election. Yeah, says here, asking county clerks whether they will allow the federal government or a third party to physically examine their election equipment. The Justice Department has taken the unusual step of asking at least 9 states for copies of their voter rolls. Also says here that under the Constitution, remember that, under the Constitution, states are responsible for running elections. That's it. And inasmuch as the federal government gets involved, that is through the Congress, not the White House. So this appears to be part of that other disquieting hair on fire article I'd seen about them building some kind of big bunch of information in an attempt probably to get a lot of people off registered voting rolls, or making it harder to get on them or to cast ballots. But I also think I wouldn't put it past them to be rigging the machinery. The executive director of the nonprofit Center for Election Research said this is an extraordinary imposition of federal power over the state's election process. I wish I'd somehow kept, and I did not, the incredulous statements of Republican county election officers who have told these people to go, you know, forget about it. You ain't getting any access to my machines. Wow. So I'm just saying, I'm just saying. I know one of the states that have been asked to turn over their voting rolls is Pennsylvania. Surprisingly, it's a lot of the Wisconsin. It states they want to get a better outcome in, maybe, than they maybe anticipate they will be getting in the midterm. I I don't know. Okay, so there's that. There's something else that I saw that I find hard to believe, even for this crowd of cruel incompetence. But it is true. because I've seen many sources over it. You know that with the torching, essentially, of USAID, that central foundational agency for American soft power of medical care and care in refugee camps and all kinds of stuff, that when the Americans were coming, people felt grateful. Um, they've dismantled everything, and we've already been told that people are dying as a result from starvation, from lack of medicine. There was a trove of emergency food, 500 metric tons of their biscuits. They're nothing, believe me, it ain't a steak and potatoes. It's these biscuits that USAID had. They cost about $800,000. They're high energy biscuits that have in one little biscuit the nutritional needs of a child of 5 for a day. So, I mean, if you're in a situation where people are dying or starving, these biscuits at least can maybe stave off the worst outcomes. They are for times when the bigger aid agencies don't have time to get in. Let's say there's been a natural disaster. So immediately you can get the biscuits to them before you can set up maybe better equipment. But since Trump became president and issued one of his executive orders that literally stopped all all of this kind of aid, those biscuits remained in place. Now, people, knowing they're there, knowing expiration dates are closing in, have begged. They have gotten as far as the State Department, Marco Rubio, please let us use these now before they expire. They never, ever got a go ahead. You know what they have a go ahead to do? Incinerate them. Over the coming weeks, the food will be destroyed at a cost of $130,000 on top of the $800,000 used to purchase them in the first place. One surviving USAID staffer told the reporter that he'd never seen anywhere near this amount of food trashed over his decades working in foreign aid. And several of the workers said they have never before seen the United States government simply give up on food that could have been put to good use. Within the next 2 weeks, the food meant for children in Afghanistan and Pakistan will be reduced to ashes. And as usual, this report from the Washington Post comes with this caveat. The sources I spoke with for this story, the reporter writes, requested anonymity for fear of repercussion. I don't know. I don't know. How do you even how do you even process that kind of stupidity and cruelty and inhumanity and incompetence? And probably in the next 24 hours, public television, public radio is going to take a hit. The Senate is in its final hours of doing for the president what he has asked them to do, which is rescind monies that had been budgeted for a number of things. But public PBS and NPR are part of the groups that will take a huge hit. And they were able yesterday, I guess late yesterday, to finally get enough votes to move this forward to a vote. It took the vice president breaking a tie because you did have Murkowski and Collins voting no, and they were joined by Mitch McConnell. And that tied the vote. And so Vance came in and put him over the top. And now they'll go on to debating the actual measure. And if those three votes are the only three that wouldn't even, that didn't want to agree to even let it come, it's over. It's over. And understand that if they do this, as many as 20% of the about 1,000, there's about 1,000 public broadcasting stations in the country. About 20% of them will probably cease to exist. And those would be the smaller ones, the ones in rural areas where often they are the only source of news. In this one piece I saw nationwide, up to 30% of listeners would lose access, will probably lose access to NPR programming. Um, Incredible. Sorry, kids. There goes Elmo. There goes Daniel Tiger. And we don't have Mr. Rogers. Even Mr. Rogers couldn't melt the hearts or reach well, he'd have a better chance than most of these Republicans. Incredible. And Murkowski, who talks a good game and every once in a while puts her vote where her mouth is, Murkowski says that it's not so much even this particular effort. She said what the Senate is doing, and she's right, is giving over to the executive branch, to Donald Trump, the responsibilities of the Congress. What do you learn in school? Well, what did you read in what now no kid will, learn about? How a bill becomes a law, that song? Well, one of the things is the Congress does the legislating, does the law making. also decides where money goes. Not the White House. The White House signs off. This White House is telling this Congress what to do, and this Congress is doing it. And Murkowski said, "We are lawmakers. We should be legislating. What we're getting now is direction from the White House. We need you to execute this. And I can't accept that." Well, she will. They all do. Even here's another Republican who voted for it. He said that, "I'm very concerned about this process, because if we do this, when will it end? Let's not make a habit of this. Let's not consider this a precedent." Are you kidding me? You're giving the guy, the president, the go-ahead to take away your constitutionally mandated powers. And you're saying, "And let's hope that this is not a precedent." What? Mealy-mouthed, weak-kneed cowards. Unbelievable. Okay, that's it. That's it, guys. Unbelievable. I have no words.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.